Unmuted. Put your slides on. Put your slides on. Put your slides on there. Yeah, right. Of course. You will talk with. Okay. You need to stand over there so we can see. Oh yeah. That's it. That's good.
Good evening. It's time to start. Before starting, I would like to make some advertisement for Monday's event, Monday, November 6th. We have the Gurney Professor of History from Harvard University visiting us, Roy Mutaheda. He will speak to us under the title of Medieval Kashan, Crossroads of Commerce and Culture. And as I think you all know, Professor Mutaheda is probably one of the icons of Islamic studies today. So I warmly welcome you all to visit us on Monday as well. But today's event is a talk by old friend Jonas Otterbeck from Lund University, Sweden. And perhaps before introducing Jonas, I should also say that my name is Leif Stenberg and I'm the director of the Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilisations at Aga Khan University. Jonas has had a long interest in the study of Muslims in Western Europe. I think I can remember when I, in the late 1990s, somewhere was lying in your sofa reading the text that will later become your thesis. And so by saying that, we have known each other for quite some time. I think it's since 1984, actually. After the thesis, you have had this interest in Muslims in Western Europe, but you have also developed an interest. I think you came to music through the study of censorship and music in general, and being part of networks on censorship music, primarily in Copenhagen, I think Copenhagen-based. And then this new idea, or since a couple of years back, you have been thinking a lot about the relationship between Islam, Muslims and music. And recently, or why you are in London, is that you have been following one of the pop stars of that world, Maher, Zain, for the last 2 weeks on his tour in Britain, ending with a concert last Monday night here in London.
That you attended?
Yeah. Very interesting, I must say. Oh, what could I say? Even though I perhaps have a little bit of another taste of music. The title today is The Awakening of Islamic Pop, and I very much look forward to it. Hope you will enjoy it. Jonas will talk for about 45 minutes to an hour, and since we are not more people than we are today, he will also be his own moderator. If there will be a problem, I will, of course, help if needed.
If we start quarreling too much.
Yeah. I will be on your side.
That's good to know.
Warmly welcome.
Thank you very much. Okay. I'm to speak on this topic, the Awakening of Islamic Pop. And it's also the preliminary title of a book that I'm writing on. I'll try to go through a number of slides. If there's anything that is thoroughly unclear, please raise a hand and we'll sort it out immediately. Otherwise, there'll be room enough to discuss afterwards also. So now I'm going to try to switch for the first time. I did a poor job at that. So, is there not there? I'm supposed to communicate with the computer. Or here? Okay. I'll shoot something. Right, you sort it out and I'll simply... The first thing I'll simply show a short clip, that is a self-presentation from the company Awakening, and Awakening is the company that I'm studying, like a case study of that specific phenomena of Islamic pop music. So this is just a short, less than a minute long rendering of what they think they produce. You might see the title there, faith-inspired music. That's a key word for them. The idea that they are faith-inspired and value-driven is something that they push all the time. Also, at times they claim that they have, in social media, the most followers when it comes to launching faith-based artists. Is there something that's not really working there? Okay. Well, while we're waiting on that, I'm going to read you a few quotes that I actually thought I would read afterwards, but it doesn't really matter. The first quote is from Sharif Hassan al-Banna. Nice name, isn't it? Sharif Hassan al-Banna. Yes, his father liked the Muslim Brotherhood, and he's named after Hassan al-Banna. I'll refer to him as Sharif most of the time. He's the CEO of Awakening. And in a book that they produced, this is what they wrote about their own music. So I'll read that and then we'll see the video. Music is at the forefront of a culture conduit which reaches and impacts millions. Faith-conscious Muslim artists are now producing Islamic music as an attempt to provide an alternative to mainstream pop culture. So let's look at this then. Could we have it full screen also? So this is just a number of their artists. As you might notice, they're all men. And I'll comment on that later. So we can close that down. And let's see if I can. Okay. That's what. So this was the quote that I read, and this is the group of people that are active. Some of them are musicians, some of them are the founders of the company. And this person here is Sharif. This one is Bara Khareji. And for those of you who do Tunisian studies, you immediately recognize the Khareji family name. So this is actually the son of Rashid Ghanouchi, the head of Nahda once. And, well, yeah, the other ones are artists that you will see sooner or later a little bit. This is a second quote, and I need to read it from here, from Sharif, also saying a lot about their vision of what they're doing. Much of the mainstream celebrity obsession also seems to be evident in the Islamic culture industry. Apart from the Islamic lyrics, art continues to operate in the spiritual, bankrupt and commercialized environment of modern hedonistic lifestyles. Okay? Art in the Islamic ethos is a spiritual experience, not one of self-gratification or mere entertainment. Lyrics changed to reflect direct Islamic teachings may be a halal endeavor, but can remaining subservient to a dominant culture which is driven by an obsession with fame, materialism, and consumerism be considered Islamic? Awakening endeavors to tackle this head-on, creating a new culture paradigm. and yes, he has a PhD. So Hassan Sharif Hassan al-Banna is actually since 2015 a PhD in Islamic law from Al-Azhar. So all of them are highly educated. Bara Khareji, that I pointed out earlier, he has a bachelor, for example, from Al-Azhar and a bachelor from SOAS. Other people who are leading the company have degrees in economy, for example. This sounds pretty stern, doesn't it? But we will see soon enough that it's much more entertaining than this sounds. So, what I will do now is that I'll talk a short while about the design of the study, present the company as such, then have a little discussion about how the new nasheed genre grew and, well, emerged basically, and talk a bit about masculinity and the ethical self of artists, which I think is pretty important, and then come to some conclusions, hopefully. So what are the girls doing, by the way? Are they holding up the Allah finger, the Tawheed finger? No, they're not doing that. They're doing like what everyone does at concert nowadays. They see the concert through the film that they're making on their telephone, their cell phones. It's very strange. I'm going to look at this artist through this frame. Very strange. Well, anyway, the material is quite obviously Awakening. And whatever they put out, when it comes to lyrics, songs, videos, the concerts that they arrange. I've done interviews and I've also done field work. And of course, I do the content analysis that I should do, of course, when there are lyrics and sounds. Sounds is an interesting thing. Most people who do music studies still stick to lyrical analysis instead of looking. What do? You listen, of course. Listen to the sounds and try to intellectualize what a sound do. Theory-wise, I'm very eclectic. So you can see some of the fields that I'm picking from. But the common denominator is a stress on agency, stress on process, stress on representation, and because of agency, representation, process, powers of interest. And then you might know or might not know of the big discussion about the ethical self. If you ever read Sabah Mahmoud's dissertation, you would definitely know it. If you read some Michel Foucault, you would know it. Or possibly if you read some Greek philosophy from before, you might also have picked up on this. The idea of schooling yourself to a behavior in contrast to what was observed in the 60s and 70s by French sociology, for example, Bourdieu not least, who were interested in why do we actually do things that we don't even think about? That was their question. The ethical self is rather, how shall I school myself to a behavior that I find the goal so I can reproduce that as if I don't think about it? That's sort of making it very simple and general. But it's actually a very interesting thing. So how do you school an artist to perform on stage, the persona that he has? This is supposed to be moral according to an Islamic order when they choose to do it in pop music, when there's such a complexity around music already from the beginning when it comes to theology. Right, Awakening, some background then. It was founded here in London, 2000, by 4 young men in their 20s. And the first thing that they did was that they issued this seerah that was written by Sharif when he was 16, encouraged by his father to do something because he was troubled about his peers not understanding anything about religion. And already as a 16-year-old, he was quite intellectual, read Arabic. He's actually completely fluent in Arabic. He has a Bangladeshi origin. So he wrote the seerah in English to youth. And when he was published, they smartly branded it SM Hassan al-Banna. So you might actually catch this in the literature of Hassan al-Banna at times. People not understanding that it's a 16-year-old boy from London that wrote it once. They formed a company, they issued it. The idea was immediately to make something of better quality, print quality, better layout quality than what was circulating already. So they put some effort into that, and that was appreciated. It sold fairly well for sort of a first book from a beginner company. They then went into audio lectures on Islam, and that's so 20th century, isn't it? An audio lecture. Now you can just click and you can watch like 100 preachers in a minute if you want to. Then you had audio lectures on CD. That's pretty late 20th century, but still bizarrely outdated to this day now. One of their other projects that was pretty early was, in fact, written by Hassan al-Banna, al-Mathurat, which is sort of a collection of prayers. And it was issued both as a book and an audio CD, and that gave them a name outside the immediate group that had picked up on the seerah, especially in the US. It was appreciated because it was fine in the printing, in the binding, and it was very much used. Now you have an app also. Eventually, they started recording American Islamic stand-up comedy with some of the guys that went on then to form Allah Made Me Funny. And in 2003, they went into faith-based pop. They signed a young man who was a childhood friend of one of the founders, Bara, who then was given the name Sami Yusuf, or possibly took the name. That's not his birth name. Once again, a man who grew up in London. He is schooled as a pianist and violinist, and they met him. Bara and Sharif met him at sort of a leadership course for young Muslims, and they said, you can do something for the community, and raised his hand and said, well, I can't. I'm a musician. What could I possibly provide? Well, said Bara, there's this genre of music called nasheed. What's that? He asked. And then they started collaborating, and in 2003 they issued the first album called Al Muallim, and it's so reasonable, not least since they managed to do something very smart. When Malaysian Rayhan, the first Islamic boy band, was touring the UK, they managed to have him open before he even issued an album, but some of the songs were there. So they planted the idea. And together with that Al-Mathurat book, they sort of created enough spin around Sami Yusuf, so people were actually buying the record immediately. So they got some money, and then they did what some really brave business people do. They sold off their cars, moved out of an apartment here, sold that, took a huge loan, paid a real director, an Egyptian, Hani Osama, to make the first video. And instead of launching that in one of the many Islamic now existing channels who played music, sort of strictly Islamic satellite channels, they said, no, let's go for the Egyptian MTV wannabe channel, Melody Hits, who had made a name for themselves at that time. Let's try it out for the so-called secular ones, in the middle of the general pop, and see what happens. And it was a great success, and literally overnight, sales skyrocketed, and this guy became a star. So let's look at almost 2 minutes of that video and make a mind note of what kind of environment is shown. How is he presented as a man? Can we have it slightly louder? Okay. I think you need to press start again.
A teacher the teacher of teachers. He changed the world for the better and made us better creatures. Oh Allah, we've shamed ourselves, we've strayed from Al-Mu'adhin.
Which of course means the teacher.
Surely we've wronged ourselves, what will we say in front of it? Mu'allim. He was Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Muhammad, mercy upon mankind. Teacher of woman.
And what is the mother reading?
أبا القاسم يا حبيبي يا محمد يا شفيعي يا محمد خير خلق الله محمد يا مصطفى يا إمام المرسلين.
Can you hear that? Only voices and percussion. Right. Here we stop. So here we have this really handsome young man in a luxurious environment, paying respect to his mother, helping the blind, and of course he's going to pray with some children afterwards. And there is sort of a mystery, a light mystery towards the end. Hi, welcome. Please sit down. So this sort of paved the way for new investments. Eventually, Sami Yusuf was to leave Awakening. There was a brawl and a discussion about contracts, and it wasn't very pretty. So they had to build up the company with new stars again. But right now, as we speak, they are one of the leading Muslim media companies globally. Up until this autumn, they had only male artists. And she was actually launched on the London concert, singing for the first time for an audience in front of like 1,500 people. I do not envy that. She was so nervous, but she made her debut. So now they actually have a female artist. And this is important. For this is also about how do you launch people. So I'll return to that. Just to try to impress you a little, this is what they produced. It's like 50 music videos, 400 songs, almost 1,000 gigs, a lot of charity concerts. They have 2016, 1 billion views on their official video channel on YouTube. 1 billion. They are particularly successful in social media, and we look at views on individual songs. One of the most successful one is Ya Nabi Salam Alayka in the Arabic version by Maher, 127 million, to be compared with, for example, Roxette's Monster Hit, who has 180, or U2's Beautiful Day, who has 105, which is actually less. We're not talking the level of Shakira, Taylor Swift, or for that matter, Justin Bieber's Baby, 1.7 billion, and the strange Gangnam Style that for some reason has been viewed 3 billion times. Hopefully not by the same person. 25.5 million followers on Maher Zain's Facebook. That is like 25.5 million more than mine. And 3.6 million followers on Maher Zain's Instagram. But one of the minor articles then have 66,000, like Raif. So Maher is their new superstar, there's no doubt about it. And by the way, that's Maher on the cake there. This is also Maher Zain from the London concert. I mentioned this. They summarize their ideas like faith-based and value-driven. We'll return to this. This is sort of an idea that we have to carry with us. Awakening's intention was not to reform Islam. The reform Islam thing comes again, but to contemporize it. That's also important. So it's value-driven, it's contemporary, and importantly, having a strong footing in the world of Islamic scholarship helped immensely. So every step on the way that they have taken, every major decision, including launching a female artist, has been checked with scholars. So first time I asked about the female artist was 2012 when I met Sharif in Oxford, and I sort of pestered him about that, and he said, I would love to have a female singer signed, but I frankly don't know how to launch her. Now they do. And I'm going to pick up on that key because something has happened that is interesting. Right. Very often this music is referred to as nasheed. Nashada, nasheed, reciting poetry, singing song is a very old word. It's a generic word in Islamic or Arabic writing, full song. So Christians can have nasheeds. Kulthum has an old film with nasheed, and the title has nothing to do with Islam. But as an Islamic genre, it tends to be vocal based with possible drums or hand clapping. It's classically improvised rather than composed in the sense that you have some themes, you have your maqamat, your scales, and you have classical poetry that you memorized. And if you're a good munshid singer, you have memorized an enormous amount of poetry that you can interfoil in, sort of, you have some set lines, and then you can interfoil something that the skilled listener will say, ah, that was smart. He picked that from that line. And then you can use an improvisation. And the idea is that the performance is supposed to be something dynamic, special in that moment, not a repetition of a record, because there were no records. This has, however, changed. There are some clear differences from 18th century, 17th century, what we can presume performances from writing, with what happens in the early 19th century. Recordings. I mean, if we go back to the word record, we record something, sort of take down. So recordings changed a lot. Instrumentation changed a lot. The standardization of instruments, the manufacturing of instruments, another way. And suddenly compositions became more en vogue. And it had to do with restrictions, for example. You should market something, and when you market it, you put it on a record. And in the beginning, records couldn't hold more music than 3.5 minutes. So that's why we have 3.5 minute long pop songs. Even classical authors, composers who wanted to launch their music, they had to make their music in parts for the reader, for the listener, sorry, to flip the record or to put on another record if it was another kind. So technology affected the way that we presume that music is supposed to be. And when it's put on stage, and when the performance is like this, to an audience, not with an audience, like if we would sit down and discuss, or for that matter, if I would start singing and you would all, aywa, aywa, go like that. You would perform with me. You would mark the rhythm. I don't need a rhythm because you're the rhythm. But if I stand on stage and perform to you, now that's something different. So all these things, they changed how you presumed that nasheed could be. So, for example, in Malaysia, there was a big band nasheed tradition. It's actually very funny, in a way, audience. It's interesting. Maybe that's not a better word. But it's sort of fully instrumental. It's like really like a big jazz band, and then they sing nasheed on top of it. You can find 60s and 70s recordings from Malaysia. Or you have the Hadra tradition, for example, in Tunisia, which grew and grew and grew, and then you had sort of profiled singers who took that other step, and then they started performing on stage instead of in a ritual context. And you had a similar situation in, we talked about Khalil Naqshbandi, the Egyptian singer and nasheed singer and Quran recitator and scholar, who also became interfoiled in recording industry and making composed performances. So something happened there. Then came a change, an interesting change. The Dawah Islamiyya appropriated the form, sort of the Islamic movement. And this is sort of and Nasheed al-Dawah al-Islamiyya. This is, if you're interested in this kind of books, there are 4 volumes. First and fourth volume you can find as a PDF file online, minimal surfing. Just write something like that in Arabic and then PDF, and you're bound to end up in it. It's a collection of nasheed lyrics, with the lyrics and the authors and everything like that, who made it popular. So they appropriated the form, politicized it. And this happened, to start with, in Syria. One of the first singers who is very known in this, sort of among the ones who are engaged, is called Abu Ratib. And he just happens to live in Gothenburg, in Sweden. I learned during my fieldwork now. So I got to find this man. He's probably in his 70s by now. Soon Hamas and Hezbollah follow. They pick up the idea that you can use music to mobilize people. And then they made it vocals only, with hand clapping, some percussion, male choirs singing in unison about picking the fight with the occupier, basically. Sometimes extremely vulgar, sometimes rather discussing the fallen heroes, or, for that matter, just simply singing about the land. When I mean extremely vulgar, I'm talking about shoot the Qassam rocket into the liver of the Jewish oppressor. That's pretty harsh, isn't it? The other change is a theological change. So now we have sort of a practical change, a change in praxis. The other change then, al-fan al-hadith and al-fan al-nadif, purposeful art and clean art, is starting to be discussed in both Sunni and Shia circles in the beginning of the 80s. I will leave out the Shias, but if you're interested, there's a book called Islam and Popular Culture with a really nice article by Yusuf from Lebanon in it. And Leif has 2 copies actually at his room. I can probably borrow one. No. Well, no, steal it then.
Library.
Library, okay. The Shia was basically in Iran and in Lebanon. That's where the discussion was done most efficiently and most intellectually. The other discussion was mainly done in the Wasatiyah circles in Egypt. So the middle of the road theology of the Muslim Brotherhood, basically. And what they said was, well, let's take it like this. There was a discourse that went from an idea that music and entertainment, film, theater, which the Muslim Brotherhood had tried to utilize in the 40s up until the revolution, basically, but then gave up, student theater, things like that, and then said, no, it's not for us, it's for the Westerners, the secular elite, etc. Well, they had a second go at it. Instead of saying that it's Westernization, the devil's voice, music is the first step to sin, etc., they said, well, if we can utilize it for something good, and if nothing bad is awoken in your heart, that's basically paraphrasing Al-Qaradawi, then there is no problem. As he said, I listen to the love songs of Fairuz. I don't go and do bad things. There's no problem. And it's fully instrumentalized. It's not in the instruments. It's in your intention. It's in your mind. That's what's causing the problem. You cannot say that the nai in itself, the flute, is the voice of Satan. Well, of course, people can do that, and it's still done in Saudi Arabia. It's still done very much so in the Salafi. It's very much so in conservative Pakistani circles, for example. There are still limits to the liberal ones. Glorifying casual sex and drugs is not going to be Islamic very soon, probably never. Neither is black metal or extreme metal. Even though someone just told me, are you here, by the way? Someone told me that there is now a Tunisian metal band. Ah, there you are. A Tunisian metal band.
No, he used metal to
promote Islam. I love it when it happens. After that, after this sort of prehistory, you have this development of praxis and theology. People starting to meet the theological ideas. In Malaysia, everything was much faster. I don't know enough about Malaysia to talk about the theological earlier history. I'm still trying to find things out there. But the Arkam sound, as Bart Barendrecht calls it, a Dutch anthropologist who has lived a lot in Malaysia. Arkam is a studio that is connected to the Islamic movement there. They have had voice-only nasheed or naseed music, as they call it, ever since Nadamuni hit it big. But it was with Rehan, which is, I think it's Bart Barendrecht, who nicknamed them the first Islamic boy band. And you should really go out and watch their videos. I'm not going to show you anything of it, but it's, well, it's beautiful anyway. This is their first album from '96. This hit it big. It outsold each secular act in Malaysia that year and has not been outsold by anyone apart from Maher Zain of Awakening since then. Another key figure is Zain Bika. Zain Bika is South African of Indian descent, English-speaking, mother tongue English. And in '94, he was 20 years old. It was the year of the election, the first election in South Africa after the fall of the apartheid regime. And one of his closest friends was shot dead during a demonstration. This really made him think about life, and he got the opportunity to make a recording. So he did 14, I think it was, nasheed songs in English without even thinking that he was actually the first one who did this. There were no prior to this. There were, in fact, bootlegs with a couple of children's songs circulating that Yusuf Islam had recorded, or hadn't recorded, but just sang at mosques. He were to release his first album with English-speaking nasheeds in '95, actually. And Yusuf Islam is, of course, the one who called himself Cat Stevens earlier and now calls himself Yusuf/Cat Stevens. So these persons, together with Daoud Wansby, a Canadian busker who basically played Irish folk music and converted in '95, and then made nasheed from '96 onwards, and also Sami Yusuf's Awakening, they all performed voice-only or vocals-only nasheed with a few drums. Now, that became sort of a genre. That became the way to perform pop nasheed. And social media, the proto-social media, sort of homepages with nasheed artists, the page called MuslimHipHop.com in the US had sort of a nasheed label that you could click. So some kind of genre emerged here. And the presumed was that it was without instruments. However, something happens in 2005, basically. So look here, this in the middle of the 90s, something happens. And I know that these are artists meeting the idea that there could be music that is entertaining but fills a purpose. But I haven't really found out what's happening in the middle here, 2005. But Yusuf Islam ended up in Abu Dhabi playing the guitar on stage. Daoud made his first album fully instrumentalized, so did Sami Yusuf. The only one who hasn't gone that road is Zain Bika, but he started to produce with sort of larger productions using more complex drums and using the South African choir tradition a lot instead. So filling the space, making larger music. I think, but I don't know, that it has to do with the medialization of this music. And it seems like Sami Yusuf is one of the ones pushing. And the reason why he's doing this is that he has all the company of Awakening behind him. All of them grew up in Europe, England, basically, or US. Bara Khareji, for example, we talked now on the tour bus when we were out, and we talked about what he listened to when he was young, and he listened to a lot of things. Tunisian Hadra, he listened to Egyptians, Nasheed, he even caught some of the Hamas things, but he also listened to Blur, which he particularly liked. Blur and Suede, actually. So he was not a stranger to musical instruments because the Hadra had musical instruments, for example. So when Sami said that, well, I am an instrumentalist, I actually do want to produce an album with instruments, they took that step in 2005. But immediately there were some setbacks. There were people refusing to book them, but other people say, yeah, right, let's put this on stage. And then something happened. It opened up a new idea of how to perform. And nowadays, most Muslim Eid parties, conferences will have one of those nasheed artists who will perform, and they will have instruments on stage. It was actually a fairly long period of time, and some made resistance, probably still do. But, well, I don't know if this is a private story. I couldn't share this. But I won't mention who it is then instead. One of the artists that I've talked to was asked to perform with a guitar, but behind a white sheet. So a white sheet like that, you couldn't see him. So they could hear the music, that wouldn't be bad, but to see the guitar, that would be bad. And he simply refused, of course. Said that, no, I'm not going to do this. So there was this change, this really sensitive thing. But because of praxis, musicians pushing, recording things, and going on stage, theology changes. And what also happened, and this is not a process that is in any way clear to me, I got a hunch that vocals only will now be the nasheed genre, and this would just be Islamic music. Raif of Awakening, Maher, Yusuf Islam, they don't really want to call what they're doing nasheed anymore. They rather call it Islamic-inspired music, but that's so long, so it becomes Islamic music or Islamic pop. But when making nasheed, it would have to be a classical topic. That is, the lyrics would have to address a classical topic of the nasheed. It will have to be religious. And when it is overtly religious, like when Rayhan did an album in, let's see, 2012, I think, or 13 maybe, with only nasheed songs, very deeply devout nasheed songs. They made it instrumental, without instruments, sorry, after having added instruments since the early 21st century. So that might emerge as a genre, like a Christmas album. You can sort of do anything during the year, and then you make a Christmas album, and then you instrumentalize it in certain ways to signal, production-wise, that this is a Christmas album. So this might be some of the futures of nasheed. Another phenomenon that pops up immediately with Sami Yusuf's production of My Ummah from 2005 is that it also produces this vocals only. So they send the album to one of those producers who I've met, at least one of them, who simply thinks music. And then they listen to the guitar, and then they say, okay, then I have to do like this. And they record that, and they arrange that, move it around in the computer, and it becomes the chord. So they make the sound, and when they record the bass, they do boom, boom, with that boom. So it becomes that a little slap, boom. And then they can adjust that, sort of lower the frequency, and then they get a perfectly good bass. You can't even discern anymore if it is a bass or if it's a voice. I have a friend who's one of those producers. He had taken the Masood Curtis recordings, Tabassum, and slowed it down. He has all these instruments in the studio, and then finally decided that he thinks that it's vocals only. It says it's vocals only. So it's all built on trust now. It sounds like music, but it's not made with musical instruments. And it can say vocals only, and you say, yeah, right. I don't have to listen to the musical instruments, but it sounds like it, which is a bit odd, but maybe a way to go. In theology, one important book comes out 2007 by Al-Judai, a Leeds-based scholar, Shafi scholar born in Iraq, has studied and taught in the Arabic Peninsula, and is part of the European Fatwa and Research Council. You might have heard of him, Abdullah Al-Judai. He wrote a 400-page book on the legality of instruments and music. And he just happens to be the teachers of two of the founders of Awakening. So I actually thought that first they wanted to change, they consulted him, and he wrote the book. So I interviewed him and asked about that, but I didn't strike gold, but something like stone, rather. He hadn't spoken with him about it at all. This was an old interest of his. He has already written something that wasn't published in the late 90s, and he just revisited that. But there was something in the time, during that time, and I haven't really figured it out. Anyone who has a good idea, please share it. But there was a change in attitude eventually, and a new thing emerged. Right. So, what kind of persona? Are you comfortable with that term, persona, sort of the person that is built up around someone? I mean, Maher Zain is, of course, a private person also, but is also a product in that sense that he's Maher Zain. So, and Maher Zain has a persona that is presented. So, in the beginning, it's very important that they are serious and loving and caring. They are modern in lifestyle. As you saw, they live in modern spaces, rich spaces. They are modern in dress, preferring sort of to signal that it's a perpetual autumn outside, slightly cold. You need a scarf around, and it's sort of autumnish colors in their dresses also. They are, many of them, handsome, with a sort of shortly cut beard, stubble. Yeah, stubble. And they function in a way as the antitype to the stereotypical Islamist, who in news would be screaming, would have a wild beard, would have unmodern clothing, and will be up in your face. Instead, these are mild-mannered, handsome men who perform an Islamic ethic that becomes part of their persona. Maybe they're not launched as role models, but you need only to look at the comments below one entry in their social feed on Instagram or one video. There will be so many role model discussion comments. And I'm not studying the reception of them, but in a way you tap into that all the time. And they have become role models, and they are so aware of it. They're also poster boys. When they go on stage, people, not least the female audience part of people, scream. I love you, Maher! We heard for example. That kind of scream, or just the fangirl scream. They're on stage like that. Sorry, microphone. But it becomes pretty cool, actually. And now they've launched a young guy, I'll present him a little later, called Harris J. And some of the Indonesian girls there have not been, well, they simply grabbed him and threw him about. So there is the ethical self, and it's also very much connected to masculinity. Let me do a slight detour. I read this beautiful article about Jewish intellectuals in the beginning of the 20th century in the US, and how important it was for the Jews themselves that they were handsome. They were presented as handsome in each and every picture, and they also sought out the handsome, well-bent man, and they portrayed them in that sort of photograph. And they were sort of the anti-stereotypical, hook-nosed, strange, often elder Jewish man that was sort of, suspicious in a way, and there was something animal about him. Instead, they were also handsome, well-built men, and I can see a clear parallel here. So it has to do with masculinity, their persona, their men. But it also, how do you present a masculinity, a desexualized masculinity? Because you can't go on stage and do the Elvis thing if you do Islamic music. So you can't dance, for example. You mustn't dance. You mustn't unbutton your shirt or do whatever you like to do, and you can't touch people in that sense, the fan thing. You have to be a little more reserved. So, as Karin van Nieuwkerk writes, you have to practice the art of no seduction. And that's not easy if you look like Maher Zain, with a broad smile and a teddy bearish charm. Now, let's look at one of the videos here. So we start at 45 seconds in. This is filmed in Chicago, and the idea was that Maher had been so serious in so many videos, so they wanted to have him a little more sort of at ease. Please.
يا إمام الأنبياء أنت في الوجدان حي أنت للعينين ضريب أنت عند الحق ريم أنت هاد وصفي يا حبيبي يا محمد يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب سلام عليك صلوات الله عليك.
And I recall it says Salah ala Habib, praise to the beloved. And every time they open it, there's sort of a light coming out.
يا شفيع يا رسول الله أيها المختار فينا زادنا الحب حنينا جئتنا بالخير.
I don't know who made the translation, so they're probably using something bad.
يا نبي سلام عليك يا رسول سلام عليك يا حبيب.
So he basically walks about the town and gives the positive message. But then all these lights, they go up and are seen by an astronaut who sort of sees the light of Muhammad that stems from the happiness that they are spreading around. So this is in contrast with very many pop videos. It's slow, isn't it? Instead of fast, like that. New camera angle all the time. It's slow, and he walks slowly, like that. And of course, it doesn't contain dancing. It's just one video, but the others don't either. Apart from one very late video where Maher almost dances. But I'll come back to that. They're generally beautiful. There's nature and cities and well filmed. Good directors. They stress kindness and they stress ethics. And they stress something highly important, a modern, included, non-marginalized Muslimness beyond the integration discourse. This is not about people being integrated or not. It's not a question, it's not an issue. These are people acting in society who owns business, works in shops, plays as musicians, are firemen, etc., etc. And that's a message, of course. Now, this seriousness is somehow, because of, I think at least, social media, has a new take. So we get the same masculinity plus a playfulness. Social media takes you behind the stage. For example, we were sitting in the bus and Maher takes up his phone and sits and films himself for a full hour chatting with people. But he sits there in his sort of not staged clothes and a small cap on his hat and sort of just an everyday. And then he goes around and films for people sort of joking around and no one is sort of directing it. You come backstage immediately, which is interesting. If you look at literature on celebrity culture, one of the first paparazzi pictures in Italy of, oh God, I forgot who it was, Elizabeth Taylor and who was shot in a photo with the first objective, what do you call it? Telescope objective. You call that?
Telephoto lens.
Yeah, telephoto lens. Kissing on a boat in a yacht. And that was then sold for an immense amount of money. And after that, stars were monitored in a different way. And when Madonna, for example, did her In Bed with Madonna, she completely changed the rules, saying, okay, they want skin. Well, let them see me naked. Let them see me when I'm angry, when I'm in bed. She completely changed the rule of the game. And celebrity culture have thrived on that. Now, these people have sort of barred off that part up until the moment when social media comes and invades their private space. So now you can see them performing in another way. Maher, he likes to train. So he says that, oh, people like to see me in different roles. So he puts out when he does Thai boxing or taekwondo or whatever, just like him being there all sweaty and boxing at things. Not taking a role, but also sort of just filming around and horsing around on the tour bus, traveling 4 or 5 hours. You have to horse around a bit, otherwise you simply die, I think. So something is happening, and there's also new awareness that Awakening has, that their audience is now their audience. Before, in the beginning, it was the Islamic organizers' audience. They brought them there. They performed on their conditions. Now they're performing on their own conditions. They can gather a big concert without having to cooperate with an Eid party or whatever. They will sell their records anyway. And they know that their fans are young. They grew up. They are integrated. Integrated. They are beyond the integrated debate. So they have their private. They know that they have their private lives. And I'll show you an example of this very soon. So this has broadened the scope. They have now more and more gone into what we can call al-fan nadif, the clean art. Not necessarily singing Ya Habibi, Ya Muhammad in every song, but in many songs, yeah. Or Subhanallah or whatever. And also they have brought on new artists. They also brought in fun, joking, really, sort of just having fun, like this one. This is Raf, grew up in Washington, Egyptian descent, and his first part of his career as a musician was to do covers, actually. Toured around and played covers, American standards that they sort of Islamized a little, so he couldn't resist this. Possibly sit and look at this seriously.
Peace upon the son of Mary. La ilaha illallah. Jesus sent with love and mercy. La ilaha illallah. He filled the hearts at once from hollow. La ilaha illallah. The more we give, the more will follow. La ilaha illallah.
Stop there. So when he did this and launched it as the Muslim Christmas song, just go out and read the comments later. It's really funny. There are so many people who simply can't take that. It's like, I really enjoyed your singing before, but man, you are taking it too far. We don't celebrate Christmas. And someone else writes, you don't understand. We're appropriating this. Jesus was a prophet in Islam, and then they have this discussion. Really fun. It's like a theology discussion in an undergraduate class or something like that. Really funny. So let's go back. Oh, not necessarily there. So they are, in a way, they're now trying to push it. So they bring humor into it, and also now, as I mentioned, they launched their first woman artist, Iman, was a German girl, I think with Moroccan descent. But are they going too far? This is Harris J. Have a weak spot for my baby sister. And then comes a long discussion. I've just taken one of the comments. It's his life. Stop saying that it's haram. Think yourself. He just took a photo with his cousins. It's obviously not his baby sister. It's normal for him. His cousins are like his sisters. Stop judging him, man. And there are a lot of judging in this Instagram space here. So obviously they are taking things. They are molding things. They are pushing things. This is the new normal, to sit like that with your cousin. Well, everyone does it, but not necessarily if you're an Islamic artist. So if you're an Islamic artist, can't you do this that every one of your listeners are doing? Well, possibly not, or possibly in a year, or possibly soon. Right, so let's try to draw some conclusions. There is Harris, by the way, from yesterday. I took this from his Instagram page. He's now in Indonesia, having a tour there, selling out venues. He's 20 years old, schooled in London at one of those colleges for theatre and arts, and won a competition as the best promising artist when he was 14, 15 years old. That Awakening had a global competition, and they picked him. He's soon to issue his second album, so he might actually cross the line, be one of the first who crosses the line between sort of strictly Muslim audience and to researchers and non-Muslim audiences. So what I find specifically interesting when doing this is this that I mentioned a couple of times. If we sort of generalize from this example, I think there is something really important to see how praxis and theology is not simply sort of you have a theology and then you have a praxis, or you have a praxis and theology follows, or anything like that. Rather, the interplay between these in a specific historical situation, in this case, a now, and all the different parameters that are at hand to try to understand this technical development, for example, which is not necessarily sort of part of either praxis that they invent a technique, or theology is simply happening around them and framing things, social media, etc. So we can see that this, when you read an article about what is the relationship of Islamic fiqh to music, well, it really has to be contextualized. And it probably would have to be contextualized even if it's the 9th century. The ethical self put on stage opens up new fields for studies that is not covered by, let's say, Sabah Mahmoud. the specific things that is happening on stage and in produced presentations is thoroughly interesting, where we can tap into certain kinds of music anthropology and celebrity culture to try to understand how, for example, theologians who hold rituals, or let's call them religious experts, present themselves. How do an imam present himself in a mosque? What is the oral presentation? What is the visual presentation? What is the verbal presentation? To build up the persona, what do you do? How do you change things? Like when Amr Khalid, which I just going to presume that you all know who is, when he came on, he didn't have the beard. He did have a suit and a tie and a smart suit on top of that, signaling something else than I've got religious authority. I've got modern authority. I'm smart, I'm rich, I know how to dress. So what is happening in these, and what can you, because of that, do when you build up your ethical self on a stage? I think that's something that needs to be integrated into religious studies. There is the aspect when we talk about migration and minority status, which is really important, and that taps into your field also, Leif, with sports, the Muslim pride thing, or the ethnic pride. Ask anyone, ask any Palestinian, who are the Palestinians in the Premier League? Are there any Palestinians in the Premier League?
No.
Dan. All right. Okay.
I can't, I mean...
Okay, I could have picked a better example. They would know. You would know who your artists and sportsmen are. Everyone knows that Leonard Cohen is Jewish, right? Apart from he's been Buddhist, well, was Buddhist like for 25, 30 years, up until he died. So you claim this. So there is a claiming of artists, which affects the artist's self-presentation on stage, which of course then goes into the praxis and theology. So this ties into each other in different ways. And I think it's really important to understand that integration discussion is important when it comes to Islam in Europe, but not perpetually interesting. It will have to be interesting about those who are newly arrived, or possibly their children. But when you look at the, like in Great Britain, I was in Slough 2014, the businessmen there, I mean, the Muslim businessmen, they are so rich that they can sponsor their own mosque, they can build it, they don't need any Saudi money. They do in Sweden. There are very few businessmen that can build a mosque in Sweden. They can. When we were in London concert, they gathered like £100,000 in less than 30 minutes in charity. I mean, the money's there, people are there, you are here, some of you are Muslims. It's about contribution. It's about creativity. It's about being part and understanding that part. Not, well, both from a religious point of view. Who am I in this situation in relation to my God? But also from a social science point of view. Which function do a person have now in a minority who has settled, who do contribute, who are actually, like, let's take the Pakistani descendant group who have, I'm not sure, maybe you can correct me, but isn't it like 40% of the youngsters who go on to university training in the Pakistani group, or let's call it Pakistani group sloppily right now, and like 20% of the general Brit? Is that roughly correct? Well, I think it's roughly correct. So what does that mean? And I think that this music that I'm studying, which is basically pop music, okay, we can have it, we can lose it in a way. But I think it's much more important than that. We can use it as a litmus test for this contribution thing, for this Muslim pride thing, for this understanding of how religion, ethnic presentation on stage works, and also for the general question of praxis and theology. Right. I'm now going to open up for any kind of discussion, but I'll just have you, if you're interested in basically some of the things that I've touched upon, I have some text out already, and these are the ones. Please, sir.
So, Dr. Jonas, thank you very much for a very comprehensive, presentation. There's two or three things I wanted to just touch on. One is that the fusion of Islamic culture, Islamic music, with the larger culture in which Muslims live is very much there in Indonesia, in the gamelan tradition.
Yes.
You see it in the Swahili culture with the Molid in East Africa. You see it in the flamenco music. You see it in Fado in a certain way in Portugal. And I was wondering how much of that historical memory is implicit in what these people did. I know they wanted to be very much within a theological framework to make sure what they were doing was not un-Islamic. But surely in their DNA there is this idea that, of course, Muslim musicians in India, Bollywood, for example, it's very quickly forgotten.
Yeah.
But in the 50s, some of the greatest contribution to Hindu devotional music was by Muslim artists.
Exactly.
So there has been that historical tradition of contributing, in a way even integrating without assimilating. So that's one dimension. And the second comment, by way of comment, is that what you've spoken in the context of pop music is very much part of the M generation, Muslims participating in the consumer world, if you may, through cosmetics, through clothing, through the hijab, through food, through alternative lifestyle, through healthy eating and living. And those two connections, do you see in your work or in the way you would look at it?
Let me start with it. Thank you very much. That's great. Let me start with the last one instead. I've simply filtered out. I'm writing a book. I got 150 pages. So it's just like that's a moment when you are almost. It's the most horrible moment to lecture, actually, because you have everything up in the air and you tend to forget things, and then you look at the text and you say, "Oh my God." Have to spin it in another way. But consumer society things is part of the work, that I'm doing. But it is part of that, but it's also part of this kind of ethical thing. For example, the tour that I followed now was a charity tour. And the tour that I followed in 2014 was also a charity tour. And that brings out the Muslim community in its diversity. And people will come there for the concert, some of them. But others, they will come for the charity, and that's pretty clear. And it will be sort of an intergenerational thing, mostly women in the audience, but actually some fairly old men in their 60s, 70s at times. So it is not strictly only the Generation M that consumes this. And you can see, for example, Maher has a song to his mother, Number One for Me, and he always introduces this in different ways, saying that do you have your mothers with you? Do you love your mother? If she's with you now, I want you to turn around and give her a hug and say that you love her, or text her. And you can see that there are many intergenerational sort of groups, that mum, dad, and fairly grown up, not least daughters then. When it comes to music, there's so many in what you said. They're so interesting because the culture of memory has been much discussed in music studies. Does it transport? For example, let's take the slave trade. There were Muslim musicians, for sure, that were transported across the Atlantic, ended up in Brazil and the US or what have you. Did they take the adhan, that scale, into the blues, or didn't they do that? That's a big discussion among musical scholars, and they tend to be very normative about it. Either they did it or they didn't, and it's very difficult to prove, of course. But there are some recordings, very early recordings by Lomax, one of the sort of ethnomusicologists of the US, who have recordings from prisons where they basically use the adhan scale to sing something completely different. So that could then be called a culture of memory in tonal language, but then when it's revealed again, can sort of be utilized and vitalized. But very often music functions in the way that musicians, they travel. Musicians aren't not always the most devout people. They might be devoted to their art, and they tend to pop up in different contexts like this, and then they bring their scales, and then it just slides in. For example, West African pop, which is often described as very unique and original, is actually very inspired by Cuban music. But very few people know that. But there are interviews with the pioneers of West African music pop that actually say, well, we did this because this is how we perceived the Cuban music to sound. It didn't turn out like the Cuban music. So people thought it was very original, but this was us incompetently imitating this. So very often there is sort of a lost memory in the translation also. So musicians has this very interesting way of moving about in history. Also, there is much to be done when it comes to music and migration, not least when you put in things like nostalgia, taste, cultural memory, as you mentioned. In the people who write on religion and politics, for example, they say that one of the typical things, if you take out the lyrics, because lyrics, of course, can be political or sort of nostalgic about the group, but if you even take that out, music can have an emotional effect, a binding effect, and a mobilizing effect. That's why we have national anthems. That's why right-wing racist groups have their songs and other people have their songs that they sing to mobilize, because it is powerful. I would actually give the Muslim very conservative or restrictive, let's call them that, theologians right when they say that music has to be handled with care because it's powerful. Like it is powerful. Plato understood this. Philosophers all through history has written about the emotional power of music. Then they have been of another mind than I am. They have thought that we shouldn't release that power because that sort of transforms society. I welcome that, of course. That's another position. But I do give them right in the power aspects of it. Let's see now. I think you were for the first one. Oh. Okay, let's do it like that.
Okay, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. I'm really interested to know more about the group Awakening, but we can have this after.
Well, there will be a book out.
Yeah, because I saw Hamza Namara, and I didn't know that Hamza Namara is part of the group. But anyway, I'll just start with a comment about the generation change and the social change. With the example that you mentioned about Said and Naqshbandi, and I think I told you the story that he was scared because he was Azhari, and he was so scared when Baligh Hamdi, one of the influential musicians, said, "I can do something for this nasheed," and he was so scared and they didn't want to go down this route until they convinced him.
Exactly.
And he started a generation of nasheed singers and things afterwards. But my question is, are you aware of any reaction from theologian and fiqh schools towards Maher and Hamza and the group? I haven't heard, but if you heard about any reaction from scholars towards this?
There are continuously people who speak out. I can't name any specific ones now, but Saudi scholars, for example, they have talked about that general kind of nasheed music, bringing in instruments. And if you go online, for example, with just the ordinary Muslims speaking, there's a lot saying that these guys don't know what they're doing. They say that it's Islamic, this is not Islamic. You cannot bring in musical instrument like this. This is haram. You may have a good intention, but you are misled. So this is a continuous discussion. And the Salafi trend, utilizing not least the fatwas of Ibn Baz, Al-Uthaymin, and Al-Albani, for example. And Al-Albani has written specifically a book against popular music in the late 90s, before he died. So these are, let's call it, I saw the beautiful phrase that Elvis have gotten a second life in his fan club. And Uthaymin and Ibn Baz has a second life online now, after their death and the demise. They are still vividly participating in debates by the multitude of fatwas they are given, and they have been very restricted. They have nothing against educational nasheed, but it should not be sang with the instruments. So you can find that. Now, is there any very profiled theologian who has spoken up, let's say, 2015, 16, and 17? That I don't know. And I would love to learn more about that. I see people speak up, but they're not well-known people. It's not a Qaradawi or someone like that. But I'm trying to find. I tend to find the liberal ones easier nowadays, actually. Before it was very easy to find the restricted ones, but now it's easier to find the liberal ones.
I would expect more to come since the peace plan started to make tours and take the shape of celebrities.
Yeah.
And I would expect more reactions.
Yeah. Oh, you find a lot online. I mean, but these are not theologians. They're just people who have sort of read a couple of lines somewhere and then feel that they should have an opinion.
Well, then Allah would have a say if something similar to what happened in London happened in Egypt. So that's just.
And it seems like the theologians are sort of embracing it quietly. The sort of the grand theologians. There was no. I should. Oh, there's such a lovely. I got to tell you this. Abdul Kilbani, a Saudi scholar, did speak up 2012 that music was not haram, and he actually based himself on Al-Judai's book, The Leeds Imam, and because of him speaking up, he was character assassinated. He was scolded by his old teachers. His homepage was hacked and closed down, and eventually Saudi Arabia king stepped in and said, that's it, no more fatwas from unauthorized people. Each fatwa will have to go through the fatwa council. There was another fatwa also that some of you might know as the breast milk fatwa, about female employers should give milk, their milk, to, well, that was the Egyptian one. There was the Saudi Arabian also. So if you work on the same office, you should simply pump out some milk and offer it to your male colleagues. That will make you siblings, and then there could be no sexuality between you. That was not a very popular fatwa among the religious establishment. Rather, they thought it as a severe embarrassment. And after the music fatwa and the breast milk fatwa, during the autumn, there came this decision from the king, the edict, no more free fatwa giving, please. Well, he didn't say please, actually. Sorry.
Thank you very much for this fascinating Thank you for this fascinating presentation. Actually, I want to speak about probably the context that this kind of group developed in. We had something with toward the end of the 90s, a kind of flourishment for satellite channels and media flourishment. And at that time, also we had politically, we had some groups like AKP in Turkey or flourishment of Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East that ended up in 2007 by Hamas winning democratically the election and being banned by the whole world. So we saw in the whole Middle East a kind of a wave of Islamization. And they adopted, actually, as you said, a kind of making it more contemporary rather than reforming Islam. So they started adopting kind of new form of really kind of coping with modernity rather than being just kind of looking for kind of old solution from the scripture and trying to modernize it. So they started to adopt these kind of ways to say like, okay, Muslims are fit really to be in a modern time. So to what extent probably you see this one, I mean, especially because you were speaking about the attitude, the charismatic attitude and probably the disciplined attitude at the stage. It's like a preacher really kind of being charismatic, being very in control with whatever you do on the stage and trying to be as influenced as possible, but as reserved as possible so that nobody could just come to you and cross this border. You know, with the social media, we have now different mechanisms, as you mentioned. So to what extent do you see really kind of a genuine artist using kind of Islamic style to produce an Islamic pop or an Islamist trying to instrumentalize music to produce probably a content that could help spreading the values of kind of, we probably call liberal Islam for postmodern probably liberal Islam.
Oh, great question. This is something that I had to struggle with a lot, and I can't say that I solved the question, but that's really so interesting, because one of the first things when I went into the study, I was in there for the fun and the music, and then soon when I started buying their media outlet, I realized that, okay, so the books are written by Syrian Muslim Brotherhood heads. Right, and I hear rumors that they are Muslim Brotherhood and that they met at Muslim Brotherhood meetings. And Hamza Namira is very often connected to the Muslim Brotherhood, even though he himself marks that he's not part of it, but his songs were utilized by them. So if you look at the first 8 years of Awakening, it's very close to the Ikhwani and the Nahda and Eki and the Moroccan party. And if you see who they perform for, well, there was the odd Maher Zain concert when he goes down and hugs Erdogan, and they performed that before the Malaysian election, or Indonesian election. They performed at the Islamic Party. They performed for the in Chechnya for the leaders, etc., etc. So there is this Islamic movement element to it, but it's not in the songs. It's never sort of the political violent thing. The closest they get is a song called Palestine Will Be Free. But that is based, they sing about human rights, dignity, they sing about non-violent resistance. So, and this goes like a red thread all through. But it seems like something happens there, 8 to 13. There is a transformation where they have more or less cut the strings and rather allied themselves with Tariq Ramadan, with Yasser Auda. Is he known, by the way? Yeah. Anyone who knows him personally?
No.
Ah, I really like the guy. Someone could send... What? Yasser Auda. Yeah. Yeah, he's amazingly good. Read his Al-Maqasid al-Sharia in English. One of the best presentations in Sharia that I read for ages. He's really smart. Put some of the students on that. Do a thorough read through. He writes in Arabic and in English, so it's a good challenge for someone who sort of is fairly fluent in Arabic. And he's really good. Sure to be inspired. Anyway, if you knew him, say hi. Hi if you're there out. But his work is produced. So these are people also who grew up in the movement, but who are trying to think out of the box. So I think that's what you have. It's not easy to discern what they were doing the first 8, 9 years, how tied, but now they seem to have sort of emerged from that in the same way as I might have been easier to politically label when I was 20 to 25 than I am now. They are so too. I'm not sure that I can give you a better answer than that. But they still keep the ties to that kind of movement.
Probably we could measure the impact of the post-Arab strain and the appearance of the Salafist and anti-Ikhwan's policy around the world, and the impact on the audience.
But let me give you a very curious example then, because they did support the Arab Spring, but they still maintain and are allowed to maintain 25 people employed at the main headquarters in Cairo, in Heliopolis, and the top floor is owned by the Mubarak family. But Hassan Amira's songs are not allowed on the radio. So, no. So and one of their artists is actually forbidden to have their songs played, but still they are allowed to operate in Egypt. Why haven't they been thrown out? If they are unconditionally seen as Muslim Brotherhood, they are not. So there is this strange thing going on that is difficult to label. I simply think that it has to do with that. Yes, they grew up, they came from the movement, they reproduced a lot of values from the movement. They have an ethos an interest in sort of non-Sufi dhikr, non-Sufi spirituality, which is so typical of the Muslim Brotherhood and Nahda and the AK movement and BJP and what have you. But PGD in Morocco. And this is something that I can get quite irritated by when people make the division, sort of Sufi spirituality and then Islamists who are only their political side. Well, go to any Islamist and they will have a spiritual side. They will do their dhikr, they will do their prayers. And I think that common field, you can see it in the poetry, for example. They utilize a lot of, they have recordings of Burda, for example. They record Qawwali poetry. So it's really not easy to label.
Without music. I'm not Qawwali, I'm not
well, they do the, you know, they pick up on some of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan's, mostly, like Allahu, Allahu, Allahu. That one sort of is, yeah, it's like a smash hit. Why wouldn't you do that?
Maybe time's up, and maybe this is now turning into a concert or something. Before doing that, I would like you all to join me, please join me to warmly thank Professor Yusuf.
And thank you for coming, even though it's late at night and I'm keeping you for dinner. Fine.